Hello, hello.
I'm Savannah.
And I'm Elysia.
And this is Burden of Proof. I straight up almost said I'm Elysia. And I'm not. We are morphing.
You could be for a day. I'll switch places with you for a day.
Sometimes I would, but sometimes no. Today I probably would.
I was going to say, it'd have to be on a weekend day because I wouldn't want to do your current job.
Oh, gosh. I don't even want to do my current job. Oh, man. It's tough. Maybe I'll talk about that on live at the end of the month, like what the differences are if we want to talk about like legal work.
Legal beagle work.
From my old job and my new job. Both stressful in different ways.
Yes. Well, do we have business? I don't think so.
I don't think so, but I think next week we will maybe have news on the structure of our Patreon or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, just look forward to some up and coming exciting changes.
Yes, all good things
are probably in the works.
Yes.
And welcome new listeners.
Yes, hello. And thank you for all of our returning people. You guys are awesome.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I got kind of ballsy this week and I decided to write a serial killer case in 1 week.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, I did. But for those of you who are new here, we usually do 1-part episodes. Occasionally there'll be 2-part, but normally it's 1 part. So if you're looking for a super deep dive, multi-part series on a killer, this is not what we provide. However,
not typically.
No.
Yeah.
But we will give you all of the facts that we deem super important, as well as lots of colorful, things that go along with it. And you're going to have a great time. So I recommend sticking around.
And also we share all of our sources.
Yes.
Which you can often find,
Yeah, because we know.
As a deep dive beyond what we share.
Yeah, we know all of the information that goes into the deep dive. We just don't have time to say it all. But all of it is in our sources, which are in the doobly-doo in the description below.
The doobly-doo.
That's a vlog. That's a nerd fighteria thing. Any fellow nerd fighters will know what I'm talking about when I say doobly-doo. But anyway, I always get nervous when I'm covering big cases like this because I'm always like, you're going to leave something out and somebody's going to crucify you in the comments.
Well, no, I think that was a good disclaimer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the internet.
Yeah, right.
So somebody's always looking to crucify people for some reason or another. But yeah.
So I literally wrote in my notes, like, I haven't covered many serial killers because they make me nervous. And then I started thinking about, I was like, well, I've done Ken and Barbie, and then we did Eileen Wuornos, and Dana Sue Gray may have been a serial killer in numbers, and I did all the Black Widows, and I did Adam Strong, and then I did Paul Michael Stefani. I started listing them, and I was like, actually, I've done more than I thought I had.
Yes, you have.
But yeah, we're jumping in today. If you didn't read the title, we're talking about Bruce McArthur. And yeah, I'm excited.
Canadian serial killer.
Yes, Canadian. We're going back to my home away from home, which is the Greater Toronto area.
Okay.
And I think this is maybe the serial killer with the highest body count, I think, other than Belle Gunness. But I'd have to fact check.
Of those that you've covered.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Not of all time. But
I was going to say, that's impressive.
No. Just that I've covered.
And well, I was thinking that's impressive to break that down into an hour.
No. Just that I've covered. And you know what? I may be wrong about that. But I think.
Okay.
And you'll see why we can fit it all in an hour. Because unfortunately, there's not a ton of detail as to actual crimes. You'll see. It's a fascinating case, truly. We're going to talk a lot about killer psychology.
My favorite.
Yeah. But if you're looking for a high body count case, Belle Gunness, I think, is a great 2-part episode that I covered. And she had an insane high, 30 to 40 victims. Super cool. Okay, anyway. As I mentioned, we're heading up north. We're from South Florida. We're going directly above us. 3 hours by plane. 3.5 hours by plane. To the Greater Toronto area. Shout out to my girls in Toronto. I love y'all. It's my home away from home. So Thomas Donald Bruce McArthur, who went by Bruce, was born in 1951 in the northeast of the Toronto farmland area in an area called Lindsay, Ontario. He was raised by his parents in a double denomination house. His parents were Catholic and Presbyterian. One was each. I can't remember which.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, he would go on to murder 8 men over 7 years from 2010 to 2017. So his house was host to lots of children over the years because his parents had a tough parenting style, and it was a draw for parents who had unruly kids. Members of their churches and community would send their troubled children to live at the McArthur house for discipline and to be raised up right. His father was always tougher on Bruce than on anyone else, and I think a big part of that was that they had to maintain this example of their perfect parenting style, as well as his father struggling with what he thought was a masculinity issue in his son. Outside of the home, where there were sometimes up to 10 children being reared, Bruce was known as a teacher's pet and a tattletale at his one-room schoolhouse. He was being raised by authoritarian parents, and I think that can usually either come out with really, really, really rebellious children or children who are scared of authorities and tend to tattle on their friends.
True.
He also never really fit in among his classmates, which, narcs don't fit in, so I'm not shocked there.
Right.
But he seems to think that part of the reason he didn't fit in with his classmates had something to do with the fact that he was gay. To be clear, he wasn't out of the closet in, the 1960s in rural Ontario. He was very firmly inside the closet, and he would remain there until very late in his life, but he felt that everyone knew he was different and already didn't accept him.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the case a lot of times.
Yeah. So he continued to repress his sexuality, marrying a woman named Janice Campbell at the age of 23, with whom he had 2 children. They then moved to Oshawa, where they became very active in their church community. And I'm laughing because that's also where Adam Strong lived. And that's where one of my best friends, Katie, lives, is in Oshawa. So when I go to Toronto, I'm staying in Oshawa.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, they lived in Oshawa for quite some time. And in the 1990s, he was unable to suppress his sexuality any longer, and he began having an affair with another married man. This affair lasted for about a year before he couldn't contain the guilt anymore, and he went and told his wife Janice and came out of the closet as a gay man. They actually continued to live together and to co-parent, and I'm not sure how his children felt about everything or if they were good parents, but from the outside perspective, that's commendable from both parties.
Yeah, if you're doing it right. Yeah.
Yeah. And they did this until 1997, and that's when they officially separated, and Bruce moved from Oshawa to Toronto, Greater Toronto.
Okay.
More specifically, he spent most of his time in the area of Church and Wellesley, which is commonly referred to as Toronto's gay village. That's how it's talked about. That's how I'm going to refer to it. It was here where Bruce was finally able to come into his own and have a happily ever after where a late-in-life gay gets to live his best life. Bruce was really active in the gay village, having boyfriends and friends describe him as a gentle, regular guy. It wasn't until 2001 that we get to see a bit of an escalation in his behavior. Halloween 2001, to be exact.
So he's in his 50s.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
He runs into his friend Mark Henderson that night, and he goes back to his apartment. And suddenly, without warning or provocation, Bruce grabs an iron pipe and attacks Mark. He beats him brutally from behind, and Mark was able to turn around to see him and look him in his face, and he says that it was truly a horrifying sight. He describes Bruce's entire face as looking clenched. He looked completely unrecognizable and did not even look human. This is a quote from the Daily Mail. He says, "I turned, and he was there like a wild man. I can't emphasize enough how horrified he was. And then I realized he's trying to kill me."
I don't even, other than to state the obvious that would be terrifying.
Yeah.
And especially somebody that has the reputation for being a gentle kind of guy.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about his reputation, but his friends definitely thought of him as a regular person.
Yeah.
He was a mall Santa.
Yeah.
In the December months, he worked as a Santa in the mall. So,
wow.
Yeah. Mark, he leaves. He leaves Mark for dead, and Mark wasn't dead, and he was able to call the police, who unfortunately did not take it as seriously at the scene as they should have. And just as a disclaimer, we are going to be talking about the significant drawbacks of the Toronto Police Department, and specifically in this situation and investigating the crimes in the gay village of Toronto. So just,
Yeah.
it's very frustrating. So they downplayed a lot of the crime because it was between two gay men, and they laughed and made jokes at the scene, and they neglected to take a witness statement. However, Mark did press charges, and Bruce ended up pleading guilty to assault in court, saying that he had blacked out and he couldn't remember anything about the attack. He received a conditional sentence, which was a year of house arrest followed by 3 years of probation. This decision was largely based on psychiatric reports that suggested that he was actually unlikely to commit another crime. His defense attorneys suggested that his sudden aggressive behavior would have been due to combined effects of an anti-seizure medicine that he was on and poppers, which, for those of our straight listeners who don't know what poppers are, they are an inhaled drug that gays, specifically gay men, take recreationally that makes them high, and it also relaxes them. And it's typically used in party scenes and before sex.
Yes.
Okay. So, and he does have an epilepsy diagnosis. So,
Oof. Yeah.
right. And so I think
Mixed with any, yeah.
So I think that's
Yeah.
part of the reason why the sentence was like light, was because the psychiatrist was like, he has no priors, so
Yeah. Yeah.
he seems like it was just a freak thing and it came out of nowhere. So
Maybe lay off the
poppers.
poppers.
Right.
Maybe
Yeah.
find something else to relax with.
Right. The conditions of his house arrest and his probation were pretty strict, and they were a little bit weird. He was on his probation period forbidden to go to the gay village area except for work and medical appointments. They said, you're not allowed back there. You're also not allowed to purchase or consume any drugs without a prescription, and obviously no firearms for 10 years. And even weirder, you cannot engage with prostitutes. Don't hire them. It's already illegal, but don't do it. That was like a strict part of his probation. And he also had to submit his DNA to a criminal database.
For assault, okay.
Yeah. Specifically, the psychiatrist wrote, quote, that McArthur had a very minimal risk for violence, and she characterized him as a passive and indecisive man who, quote, seeks to maintain an image of being proper and cooperative person, prone to behaving correctly and modestly.
Well, I mean, this being his first offense, I can understand.
Yeah.
All of that.
Exactly.
I mean, the probation conditions, I also understand. I guess I'm just a little surprised. I don't know if they do that here. Like, such
I don't know.
specific, and like here I always was under the impression that most of the time the conditions are just, generally don't do anything else illegal.
Yeah, don't break the law at all.
And follow like all your appointments and things
Right.
like that. And there may be like drug testing involved or something.
Yeah. I've never heard of anybody having such specific probation.
Right.
But I honestly didn't look into it a whole lot, so I can't
yeah.
say. But when he did emerge from his probationary period and go back into the gay community and the gay village, it was well known that he had this history.
Mm-hmm.
He also garnished a reputation for BDSM and fetish sex, which, as we've discussed before, does not make you a violent person. But this paired with his reputation for assault definitely, kind of marred that mall Santa gentle image. And he started turning to dating apps too, which I will say, I don't really talk a whole lot about the dating apps throughout my write-up of the case, but that is a big part of it. He met a lot of these men on dating apps. His username was Silver Daddy. So the most frustrating part about what comes next in this case is the lack of answers and reasoning for what we have and why he does what he does. We'll never hear Bruce's side of the story. And not that I care to, I just wish that I kind of knew what caused the lead up, and I don't.
Yeah.
The next disclaimer that I want to give is I am going to try my absolute hardest. Almost all of his victims, were of Southeastern Asian or Turkish descent. They were almost all refugees or immigrants, bar 2 of them. And so sometimes the names can be very difficult. I tried to write them out phonetically. I'm going to do my absolute hardest, and I'm really sorry if I mess anything up. Please feel free to let me know how I should say things. I have tried so hard to do research on how to pronounce it, and then you get in front of a microphone and you just can't. So
Yeah, that, and I've had the experience of sometimes you actually find multiple ways,
Yes.
multiple versions.
right.
And then you're like, but I don't know how they
They say it,
specifically. Like
right.
my name, there's a lot of people with the spelling of my name, but my parents called me Elysia, but a lot of them who have my spelling, that's not how they pronounce theirs. So you never know unless you talk directly to the people.
And shout out to the Serial Killers podcast, because when you listen to them talk about this case, they are so confident in their pronunciations of the names. And I really am going to try and emulate that, because
all right,
it's very professional of them. But I'm very nervous. I'm always nervous. I'm going to butcher it. I hate that. So starting with Skandaraj Navaratam, his friends called him Skanda, was a longtime friend of Bruce's. They had known each other since 1999, which was most of the time that Bruce had lived in the gay village. He moved there after his separation.
Yeah.
And for most of their relationship, they were just friends. But as we enter 2010, he and Bruce had started dating. So when Bruce moved to Toronto, he went on to open a landscaping business. Prior to that, he was a traveling salesman, I believe. But most of people talk about his landscaping business because he would make these beautiful, like, desert style landscapes at these, really wealthy, affluent homes, including these huge, like, potted succulents and, like, desert things. And, like, it was insane. And considering that this is in Canada, it was...
Yeah, that's why I'm making the face that I am.
Right.
Like,
and so
how does that survive?
Yeah, and he did well for himself. He had a very good name. He worked off of word of mouth mostly, and all of his clients had they loved him.
Okay.
He actually had a really great relationship with some of his first clients. He used their fairly empty garage to store all of his equipment, and in exchange, he did their landscaping for free, and he would house sit while they summered at their cottage, which is pretty common in the Toronto area. People have cottages that they'll go to for holidays and for summer break and for Christmas and, on the lake. So,
yeah.
And they would give him a key to their house. Like he did well with his clients, and they knew his kids. And so he'd been doing that for about 3 years, and now he's dating his long-term best friend, and everything's really starting to work out for Bruce. Except that for some reason, he really struggled to believe that all of this was true. He was insanely jealous with Skanda and paranoid, and he really thought that he was cheating on him, so he kept confronting him. They spent a lot of time together, and Skanda's friends were getting really nervous because they were starting to see less and less of him. Things really escalated on Labor Day weekend, September 6th, 2010, which was 14 years, almost to the day that I was researching and writing this case. Skanda and Bruce go out to a party together. Not to a party, go out to party.
Okay.
Maybe it was a party. I don't know. They were last seen leaving a bar called Zippers.
Okay.
So, we don't know the chain of events, but we do know that Bruce strangled Skanda that night. Afterwards, he drove his body to the house on Mallory Crescent, where his long-term clients let him use their garage as storage. He dismembered the body and buried the remains inside of one of the large planter pots he had on property. Halfway through this process, he did stop and took a trophy, which was one of Skanda's bracelets. What's so interesting about this is that he only has one major incident on his record prior to this, the attack on his friend Mark.
Yeah, that's...
Dismemberment is a sign of
huge jump.
Yeah. And not even murder from attacking to murder is a huge jump in and of itself, considering his age. But from murder to dismemberment and to burial and trophies and moving on, that is a huge escalation jump. I mean, it's honestly because Bruce was in his 50s and he had to keep on track for a serial killer in his 50s because most serial killers start in their 20s.
Yeah.
He's got catching up to do.
I guess.
The jump was, it's unfathomable.
That's horrifying. To me. And when you said that dating apps were involved and stuff too, it's a whole different thing when you kill somebody close to you versus somebody else.
And that's our next step, because you're going to see, that is our next step, is going to be, he's killed Skanda. And our next victim is going to be in December of that same year. So December 29th, 2010, Abdul Bassar Faizizi. He worked as a machine operator at a printing company in Mississauga, and he was supposed to work the 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. shift, but his coworkers actually say he left around 3 o'clock. He calls his wife around 7:30 and says that he's going out with friends, but he was not out of the closet. He was living as a straight man, but would go out with his gay friends in the gay village at night, including Bruce. So he and Bruce had hooked up at least, more than once. And so what we can assume is that he was meeting up with Bruce that night.
Okay.
There were records of that, in phone records and stuff. He never came home that night, and the next day his cousin reported him missing. His car was later found abandoned in Toronto in the area of St. Clair Avenue and Mount Pleasant Road, which was near a home that Bruce landscaped for, which obviously they didn't know that at the time.
Right.
So now he's killed 2 people that he knows, and so now it's kind of time to start moving into people he doesn't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, 2 people, acquaintances and friends might look at you and be like, wow, that really sucks. 2 people, close to you within a relatively short period of time. But if a third goes missing,
right,
that's going to look real suspicious,
right,
Bruce.
Well, especially 2 people that he had been known to hook up with. Because he was dating Skanda, and then with Abdul Basir, they were hooking up. So, but we're actually going to jump a full 2 years later to October 2012. Majid Kayan, who's a 58-year-old from Afghanistan. He was an immigrant and was reported missing by his son. And McArthur actually killed him on October 18th. That's when he was last seen. And most of the time, they were killed on the night that they were last seen. That's kind of the rule of thumb with his victims.
Okay.
And he was last seen at the Black Eagle Bar, which is a bar that Bruce and Skanda were known to frequent. And they had run into each other once or twice, but they mostly knew each other off of a dating app. His son reported him missing on October 25th, and he was usually in regular contact. But like I said, Majid was 58, so he had adult children.
Right.
And at least an adult child. I don't know how many kids that he had. And his son wasn't waiting for him to come home or something. So it took a while for him to be, reported missing, but it wasn't because nobody was looking for him. It's just that he was a grown adult and,
Well, was he still married or was
No, he was a single guy.
Single guy. Yeah. It's not unusual, especially the older you get. It's not unusual if you're single and your kids are grown and out of your house there's lots of people that stay in contact with you, but any given person may only talk to you once a week.
Right. And his son said they talked regularly, but he knew it was weird, but it wasn't it wasn't concerning until it had been almost a week.
Yeah.
So the police knew that he had been missing for quite some time, A, because they were able to pinpoint the last time he had been seen as the 18th, and B, when they first went into his apartment, he had a pet bird who had passed away. So nobody had been home.
Yeah.
And it was after this third murder when, quote, Project Houston was formed. So the LGBTQ plus community of Toronto had been crying out for help from the authorities for a while. They knew that they had a serial killer amongst them. Mm-hmm. They know people are missing. They talk amongst each other. Everybody is connected. And they had been asking for help for quite some time. And they were being completely ignored until Project Houston was formed. If only it had actually done something. There are lots of debates and conversations about what the police actually did during Project Houston, but unfortunately, if they had done any better of a job, they would have caught Bruce in 2012 and not 2017.
Oh.
They linked Bruce to Majid and interviewed him as a witness to a missing persons case, but not as a suspect. He admitted to knowing him and saying that they had had a sexual relationship in the past, but that Bruce said, I broke it off. We're not actively seeing each other or having sex. And the reason that this is so incredibly frustrating is because I'm going to jump ahead to 2014 and then we're going to come back. In 2014, Bruce had his criminal record from 2003 expunged. So they call it a record suspension, but that was in 2014. This is in 2012. He has a record of assault with somebody that he had hooked up with before. And he wasn't linked. He wasn't even looked at as a suspect. He wasn't questioned as a suspect. They didn't think to check his car or like, it was just. Anyway, they knew that in 2012. It doesn't, whatever. What do I know? Just a wee podcaster.
Yeah.
They could link him to the Black Eagle bar regularly. And as he was linked to be one of the people who had seen him last. But again, I'm just a lowly podcaster.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know I know what I want to say, which is there's no accusations that they're like intentionally doing anything. It just,
Right.
it's, if you're following every single lead and listening to the people within that obviously relatively tight community.
Yeah.
How would you not connect some of these dots?
So in late 2012, during Project Houston, they did find evidence that Skanda had been murdered. They were like, yeah, he didn't just up and disappear. This was a crime. And they started pursuing with the homicide squad this suggestion that Skanda had been a victim of a cannibalism ring. So they were looking into it, but it was just like so far off in a different direction. And I don't know what kind of evidence they had towards this cannibalism ring or how Skanda may have been connected to it. It was just like whatever they were working on was the wrong thing to allocate their resources towards. And there are issues later where some of these police officers and detectives are prosecuted for the mishandling of these cases.
Oh.
So there was bigger stuff at play with Project Houston. Like when I say they could have caught him in 2012 and they didn't, there's reason to believe that they genuinely could have caught him and they did not.
Yeah.
So once they kind of looked into the cannibalism ring thing a little bit more, the evidence did not line up and the investigation sort of continued, but without the involvement of the homicide squad. So like, okay, so it wasn't part of this, so clearly he wasn't murdered. That was kind of their thought process. And in April 2012, Project Houston is like ex-nayed. They're like, no, we're stopping this. And McArthur was never listed as a suspect in their investigation.
Okay. I don't know what to say
to
any of that.
Exactly. Jumping to August 2015, Sarush Mamundi was a 49-year-old professional painter who was last seen alive in his bed asleep in his house near Markham Road, which, if that sounds familiar, that's because it's from Ken and Barbie. We were in Scarborough. He is reported missing by his family. He was last seen, like I said, in bed asleep. But the next morning when his family woke up, his work bag was gone, his work clothes were gone, and it's safe to assume that he had left in the night to go meet McArthur, and he was never seen from again.
He was never seen from again?
Yeah, you know what I mean, okay? He was never seen or heard from again.
Got it.
Late 2015, Bruce kills Karishna Kumar Kanagaratnam. I'm sorry, I've tried so hard. He was 37 years old, and this was somewhere between the end of 2015 and January 6th of 2016. Karishna Kumar, who was a refugee from Sri Lanka, was killed, and he was actually never reported missing. So the reasons behind this are not because he didn't have people who cared about him. He wasn't reported missing because even though he had close friends in the area, they knew that his refugee claim into Canada had been recently denied, so he was supposed to be deported.
Oh.
His deportation date had come and gone, and so they assumed that when he stopped coming around that he was in hiding in order to avoid being deported. They didn't want to call attention to the fact that he was still in the country, you know? So he was killed sometime in between there, and we're just not sure when.
Yeah.
In April of 2016, Dean Leesawick checks into the Scott Mission shelter in Toronto, and that would be the last time that he does that. And he was killed on or around April 23rd. June 2016.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is escalating.
Yeah, he's getting more close together. And in June 20th of 2016, the Toronto police questioned Bruce after a man called 911 to report that he had attempted to strangle him in his van during an otherwise consensual sexual encounter. So McArthur turns himself into the police, and he is arrested, but he is let go without charges. This is the incident where we get a good look for how the crimes may have actually gone down. So I'm going to read directly from the statement of admitted facts from later in the case. And this is not from this situation because he was arrested, but they didn't charge him, so he didn't give a statement. But later, when he is indicted for murders, this is the statement of admitted facts. So if it sounds really blocky, it's because it's from a court document. On June 20th, 2016, Mr. McArthur showed up at the workplace of a man he'd known for years. Mr. McArthur asked the victim to meet in his van in a parking lot later that evening. The victim got into Mr. McArthur's van. The seat behind the driver's seat was gone so low there was room to lie down. The floor of the van had a plastic sheet on it, and on top was a fur coat, lying open so that the lining was exposed. Mr. McArthur told the victim to lie down on the fur coat and to put one of his arms behind his back. Mr. McArthur then held on to the victim's wrist with an angry look on his face. The victim asked Mr. McArthur to stop, but he did not. With a look of determination, Mr. McArthur grabbed the victim's throat and started strangling him. The victim was rolling to get away and started begging and pleading with Mr. McArthur, saying, "What do you want from me and why?" Mr. McArthur did not respond. The victim managed to roll away from Mr. McArthur and was able to escape the van. He was unable to swallow properly for a week. The victim called 911 and gave a statement to police. Mr. McArthur attended the police station on his own, was arrested, and gave an exculpatory statement. An officer released Mr. McArthur without charges, believing his statement to be credible. Criminal record search at the time would have showed no results because of Mr. McArthur's record suspension. Police later find a folder of the victims in Mr. McArthur's electronic devices, and in some of these photographs, the victim is wearing a fur coat which appears to be identical to the one that was in the van, and is also identical to the one with Mr. McArthur would pose his deceased victims, which we will talk about later. So that's in June 2016. We kind of see what actually goes down.
I was waiting for some weird piece.
There it is. Yeah.
There it is.
Oh, yeah. So in April of 2017, so June to April.
Yeah.
Salim Isin, a 44-year-old Turkish citizen, goes missing. And Salim is a particularly sad case for me. He and his best friend had gone out to a bar, and his best friend had just given him some money because Salim was part of a program where he had a trustee watching over him. And I don't know all the details, but I do know that he basically got $10 a day, and he had to go specifically to wherever he was supposed to meet up in the mornings, like where the shelter was, to get his $10 a day. So he was out with his friend. His friend had just given him some more money, and he says, "I'm going to go. I'm tired. I need money." So it's assumed that his friend thought he's going back to the shelter tonight so that he can make sure he gets his money tomorrow.
Right.
That was the last night that he was seen. So that's April 2017. And again, we're escalating June of 2017, just a few months later. Andrew Kinsman, who was a 49-year-old Cabbagetown resident, goes missing. Now, Andrew was a super for the building that he lived in, and when his tenants didn't hear back from him after emailing him and asking him questions, they also started noticing that things were generally left unfinished, which was very unlike him. He finished his daily tasks every day.
Right.
So they called and reported him missing. This resulted in the launching of Project Prism, and this is the task force that would eventually lead to Bruce's capture. The police were able to enter his apartment, and when they looked around, they noticed an entry on his calendar labeled Bruce. They then started looking at security footage and found footage of Andrew getting into a red Dodge Caravan and got a good image of the driver, like a decent image of the driver.
Okay.
They basically then took this footage to the Canadian Department of Transportation, or whatever they call it there, and they were able to track down Bruce as the owner of this vehicle. There were like 5 Dodge Caravans in the area with somebody named Bruce in the name as an owner. And then they were able to label it specifically as Bruce McArthur because of some of the weather tech stuff and things that were on Bruce's Dodge Caravan in the video, as well as some other specific stuff. But tracking down the vehicle and the owner took a lot of time. And in the meantime, they continued to trail Bruce. They did this for a couple reasons. Number one, they needed some solid evidence to get a warrant to search his apartment. They, like, other than just of, you know, footage of Andrew getting in his vehicle. They don't have proof that he killed him, you know?
Yeah.
And they also wanted to try and get a discarded DNA, like, piece of evidence from, you know, and they did. They ended up getting it from a coffee shop, a fork and a plate that they were able to, you know, uncover. They also wanted to try and get a good idea of his everyday life, and this takes our investigation into the end of 2017. So I'm going to switch directly to reading from court documents because I thought this was interesting. I used to read from court documents all the time in cases, and I don't know why I stopped. I'm doing it again.
Okay.
After they, you know, had been tailing him for some time, we pick up December 5th, 2017. Quote, DC Joel Manhers applied for and was granted a general warrant to covertly enter Mr. McArthur's Thorncliffe residence in order to copy and examine any digital device and storage media relevant to the murder investigation. So on December 7th, 2017, they did covertly enter McArthur's residence. Once inside, the technological crimes team, cool job, copied a USB drive and a digital external hard drive found in Mr. McArthur's bedroom. Police only downloaded 45% of an old desktop computer hard drive before they had to leave. During that entry, the police also searched other areas of the home, which resulted in the following: a DNA swab of an orange stain found on Mr. McArthur's pillow, DNA swab of a 7 to 9 inch metal bar wrapped with tape, Post-it notes with website account names and passwords. DC Joel Manhertz and DC Charles Coffrey examined the downloaded content from Mr. McArthur's electronic devices, and they found the following: content referencing Mr. Kinsman's online usernames, over 100 photographs of Mr. Kinsman, some dating as far back as 2007, demonstrating a connection between Bruce and Andrew, who went by Auntie.
Mm-hmm.
As they continued their investigation into the new year, January 17th, 2018, DC Manhers and DC Coffrey discovered photographs of the deceased victims and digital devices that they had copied.
Mm-hmm.
He had attempted to delete these, but they were able to recover them through forensic analysis. With respect to Andy Kinsman, there are 18 photographs of Mr. Kinsman in which he is deceased. These photographs are described as follows. Some of the photographs depict Mr. Kinsman lying on top of a fur coat. He's not wearing any clothes. There are also pillows and blankets underneath him. In these photos, there is a rope looped around Mr. Kinsman's neck with a knot tied at one end. Through the loop created by the knot is a bar wrapped in tape. This created a mechanism whereby rotating the bar would turn the knot, increasing pressure on the neck.
Yeah.
This series of photographs is taken from multiple angles. There are a close-up of Mr. Kinsman's face, showing obvious signs that he is deceased. Another series of photographs show Mr. Kinsman's body in different positions. The murder weapon has now been removed, and there are ligature marks around his neck. He is still naked, and this series includes close-up photos of Mr. Kinsman's genitals. These photographs also show a ligature mark on his wrist. Mr. McArthur took these photographs, and in his report, Chief Forensic Pathologist Dr. Michael Pollinan describes some of these photographs as demonstrating a marked facial conjunction and a big scientific word that I cannot say. And it's consistent with strangulation. That is as detailed as we're going to get. You made it through that part.
I don't know.
I know.
I don't understand any of this.
You're not going to, because we get no explanation as to why the escalation. And he didn't start by posing all of his victims like this either.
Yeah. And how many bodies have they found up to this point?
None. They have not found any bodies. They just have missing people.
So I have to ask the scary question.
Mm-hmm.
Did he dismember
Yes.
each and every one of these people?
Yes, he did.
Huh. I'm just so baffled as to, what makes you just snap in your 50s?
I don't know. I have no idea.
That's wild.
Yeah. So while they had been following him, I mentioned they got a DNA sample, and they also got to see him spend lots of time at the Mallory Crescent house. That's the name of the street, not the name of the family, I should clarify. At this point, they had also seized his car, like his van.
Yeah.
He had an additional car, but they seized his van. And they saw it at an auto shop, and they seized it then. So They had evidence that he'd been in the car, and when they had the car, they were able to find lots of other evidence that comes into play later. I don't get super into it, but they find DNA evidence all over the car.
Yeah, not surprising.
Right. So, of course, this takes a lot of time to process, and it's the surveillance that they continued that eventually leads to him getting caught. On January 18th, 2018, Bruce is under surveillance when a man who is still a John Doe, well, I mean, they know who he is, but his identity has been protected. This John Doe is seen entering Bruce's apartment. The police just had a bad feeling. I mean, obviously, they've been watching him since September of the previous year, and I think I saw somewhere where he had been surveillanced for 15 days, like total out of that time. It wasn't like they were watching him every single day. They did have people like trailing him pretty frequently. And he had obviously interacted with other people. He's a working person. So they just had a bad feeling, and very luckily they intervened. The police entered Bruce's home to find John tied up in his bed, luckily still alive. January 19th, after interviewing the family at the Mallory Crescent house, they released the cadaver dogs. It was here that they found the remains of 7 of his victims and 5 potted plants around the yard.
Oh my God, he put them all in the same place.
Mm-hmm. The 8th victim was found in the ravine behind the property, and this was Majid, and we still don't know why. This is another area where the police just generally screwed up in communication with the public. On one hand, they were telling everyone in press releases that there is no serial killer. You gay people, you're so dramatic. There's no serial killer. But at the same time, they were actively linking Bruce to at least 8 murders.
That's a serial killer.
Yeah, they were just trying to play it down because the gay community had been crying out for help and being ignored, and they weren't quiet about it. In March of 2018, it takes them a long time to go through the property because they had to dig up a lot of things to just, like, A, find all of Majid's remains that they could, and B, the ground was frozen. So it's cold, and it took a long time to, catalog everything. And so we're going to talk about some of the things that they did during that time. In March 6th, 2018, the Toronto Star revealed that an internal police misconduct investigation had begun in connection with the Project Houston matter, specifically related to the 2016 choking incident where he walked away with no charges.
Yeah.
April 3rd, 2018, the Toronto police withdraw the application they had submitted to participate in the 2018 Pride Parade. One day after the Pride Toronto and coalition of LGBTQ groups had called on police to rescind their request. They asked them not to take part due to their rage and general outrage about the way that these missing person cases had been handled. My notes say they may be gay, but they're not dumb.
Yeah.
I am going to say the quiet part out loud here, people. They started paying attention and looking seriously when the white guy was killed.
Yep.
So it's very frustrating when they had been saying these things were happening, but nobody took it seriously when it was immigrants and refugees.
Of course.
Right. So
what do you say to that?
It's horrible. It's horrible. And it makes me sick to my stomach. And on April 16th, 2018, Bruce McArthur was finally charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. They'd slowly been adding these counts as they found and identified bodies. And it took a while because, oh my gosh.
Yeah, you said everything was frozen.
Yes, everything was frozen. And at least one of the victims, they had to take, reconstruct his face and, make sure that it matched, the bones matched a picture that they found on his computer that they were able to, crop and say, do you recognize this person?
Yeah.
But April 16th, 2018 was the day that they got the final 8th count of first degree murder added to his charge. October and November of that year, the remains of the victims were released back to family and friends, allowing for funerals and memorials to take place. And January 19th, Bruce McArthur pleads guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for each man that he killed. His sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week, and the judge sentenced McArthur to 8 life sentences for first-degree murder to be served concurrently with no chance of parole for 25 years.
He was already in his 60s.
Right. So,
yeah.
and people were like, that's a light sentence. He gets to serve them concurrently, and it's 25 years, he gets parole. And they're like, yeah, he's going to be 91.
Yeah. I mean, what?
And the chances that he gets parole are very remote at best.
Yeah, chances are, even if he lives
right
to get out, he's going from one institution to another for like nursing care.
Right. So, yeah. And he's still incarcerated. And I wanted to say one other thing that I didn't fit in anywhere else about the timelines of these murders, because some sources that I listed down below will talk about how, he killed around holidays and he waited so far away from each crime and things were slow going and blah, blah, blah. About how long it took, he killed 8 men over 7 years. But the reality was, and maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but he was burying these victims at a property that he did not own. So he had to wait until they were going to their cottage. So to me, it makes absolute perfect sense that, he killed around the holidays. That's because the family who lived at Mallory Crescent wasn't home.
Yeah.
So I think it was a convenience thing. I don't have proof of that, but that's my theory behind it.
It makes the most sense.
I think so. But
I still... I mean, because you said most of them were buried like in big pots.
Yes, like huge potted succulent plants.
Right. Yeah. It's still kind of weird to me that no one... I guess it never really gets that hot, though.
No, and by the time it would have gotten that hot, it was decomposed. They were decomposing in the soil, and he was...
I know, I just can't imagine, not... Now, one makes sense, but having that many in that many different pots, I would think,
there were 5 pots.
Something would
also
smell funky.
I also don't know where he dismembered them. That's a messy task. I don't know the answer. I'm sure that it's in... It may be in court documents somewhere. The problem is that he pled guilty. So...
Yeah, so
the statement of admitted facts that I was reading from is 36 pages. I did read all of it, and it's not mentioned. But they didn't really have to prove that. So,
yeah.
We kind of only know what he allowed us to know. One thing that's interesting is they did allow victim impact statements, and one interview that I saw, or a newscast that I saw, said that the owner of the Mallory Crescent house acknowledged, she said, we are very low on the totem pole, but if we get to speak, we want to, because that he had been completely taking advantage of their kindness for years. And I do think that they are also considered victims in this case.
Well, that's just horrifying to find out that,
they were like, release the hounds, let them find it.
Let you use our property for one person, and you took advantage to freaking bury bodies.
Right. And they knew his son, his son would come by, and he watched their house. It wasn't that he was just their landscaper, he was their house sitter.
Yeah.
And at least we think that some of the victims he brought back to their home to murder them.
Ugh.
So it's some were in his car, some were in his home, some were at that house. It's kind of up for grabs, but that's...
Yeah, I mean, it would feel like such a violation. It's being broken into. It's not just about the stuff that they may take from you. It's about the fact that they were in your home at all, violating your space.
Right. And another thing we didn't really touch on is I didn't touch on all of the DNA evidence that linked him to all of these crimes, which obviously they had in order to prove, first-degree murder.
Right.
And B, that he kept trophies from most, if not all, of his victims, as well as pictures. And he labeled the folders, if he knew their names, he labeled them by their names. There are some that he didn't know their names, and he just labeled them with I think one of them was labeled Turkish guy, which is horrific. So there's so many little details to this case, but
I'm just so baffled.
Yeah.
Befuddled, if you will.
I know.
To start such things so late in life.
Right?
And to not have, like, I get that his upbringing probably, I'm sure, had some sort of trauma to an extent. Just so much with serial killers, you hear that they had a terrible childhood, horrific, beaten, abused, etc. And it's not that, like, I do not. That is traumatizing to be a gay kid growing up in a very religious household, obviously unaccepted, you know, not that they knew, but it doesn't matter. You know,
right, you know,
like, even if they're not saying whatever horrible thing that families do to kids, but even if they're not saying it, he deep down, I'm sure, knew somehow, and it's traumatizing, but to that level.
Well, and we do think that there was like corporal punishment in his home, but he just never really did anything wrong. He was scared. So I am personally of the belief that this may not have been his only 8 victims. It just may be the only 8.
Yeah, true.
That he used the same methodology and that we found. The Toronto Police Department has said there's nobody else. They've closed the case, that's all they can link him to.
Yeah, the only thing, and I'm not an actual profiler.
Mm-hmm.
I just play one on a podcast.
Yes.
But the only thing that would make sense to me is his disdain or him carrying the anger that he didn't fit into his previous life.
Right.
And him not ever having done this until he was separated from his wife and living openly as a gay man. But at the same time, I could see that stirring up a lot of feelings for him, and him not knowing what to do. Doesn't excuse anything. As always, we're not excusing things. We're just fascinated by the psychology. But it is still so shocking that you could just live this relatively normal life for years, for decades, and then all of a sudden do crap like this.
Well, even go years between like these killings, you know, from 2010 to 2012.
Yeah,
and
to skip time.
Yeah, it's very unusual. And he just has a lot of traits that aren't unusual for a serial killer. And the escalation is one of them. And that's why I kind of struggle to believe that could be it. The only other thing that makes me, I agree with you that could totally be part of it. Another theory that I have is that he always felt sort of violent urges, and until he separated it out just like he did his sexuality. So he repressed that just as much and just as long. And once he let go of his sexuality repression and he was out, he struggled to repress his violent tendencies as well. But again, we have no proof or evidence of that.
Yeah. Wow. And that's not even touching on all of the victims and their families.
Right.
And some of them were obviously not living openly gay.
Yep.
And so those poor wives have to not only find out.
And most of them were immigrants, and several of them were refugees, like religious refugees. And that's a whole other thing. Like,
and that's a whole other discussion about the vulnerability of that group of people.
I don't think that he, and this is an assumption, this is my opinion, I don't think that he killed specifically Southeastern Asian and Turkish immigrants because he was racist. I think he knew that they were the most vulnerable to be overlooked by police because he was hooking up with other men. It wasn't just these guys.
Yeah.
He picked and chose, you know.
Was meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't necessarily think it was like a race-induced crime. I think he just knew.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you made it this far,
I don't know
what to say either.
I don't know.
Thanks for hanging out with us. And if you made it this far and you want to be entered in for Sunday shout-outs,
yes,
I'll leave us a succulent or a cactus emoji.
Oh.
Or a plant emoji or a watering can emoji for regrowth. You know.
Yeah.
Rebirth of life.
And thank you for listening, and look forward to some big announcements.
Yeah, we've got a lot coming up over the next few months, and we are so excited for all of those things.
For some big, wonderful changes.
Yes.
That are in the works. And most of which will have to do with our Patreon. So if you'd like to join us on Patreon, You can join for free and just cast a vote in our monthly Patreon cases.
And if you would like to support our lovely indie podcast production, there's no company behind this. It's just Elysia and I in a studio that we built in Alicia's house. And we do all of the work ourselves. So if you'd like to support us or show us support with a monetary gift, that would be great. Our Patreon is $3 a month, and it includes a monthly live stream, access to always ad-free episodes, outtakes from our episodes, which are funny things that don't always make the cut, and feel like I'm forgetting
Facebook
something.
group.
We have a private Facebook group.
We always forget the Facebook group. We're so sorry.
And I feel like there's something else.
That's okay. You get a lot for $3 a month.
You do get a lot for $3 a month.
And that may be going up, so we'll see.
Yes, so if you're interested in that, maybe we're going to suggest
now.
to clue in now, because in the coming months, we may be adding another tier, so
yes,
you may want to clue in. Other than that, we will see you guys next time.
Yep. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, guys. Find us on Instagram and TikTok at Burden of Proof Pod, and email us at burdenofproofpod@gmail.com.